Today's speaker is going to be Giancarlo Berger. He's from Sapien. And he's going to present about client libraries. Very interesting CQ concept. He can tell you guys more about himself.
Thanks. Okay, ready? I hope you guys didn't come just because of the free pizza.
Yeah, you guys have to eat that, right?
Yeah.
Drink the water.
I also brought these, I still don't really know how you call them. I think they're folders or hangers or whatever. Feel free to take them along. Our marketing department exaggerated a little. I said, you know, there are a few coming, and I think I got about 30 or 40, and I don't want to carry them around. So if you want 2 or 3 of them, please feel free. And let me get going here. I think if I know Ruben, he wants to stop on time. Topic is managing client libraries. It's actually quite an easy topic, so no big deal. It's because the important part is the concept. If you get the idea behind it, it's rather easy. And then there's also something I like to call coding discipline, which is disastrous when you look into certain offices, and I'm not speaking only about Sapien. Okay, I was at Jquery, so be aware of that.
That all changed.
Yeah. So
we're seeing a trend.
There's a trend. Yeah, it's and I have a couple of slides just to make it more aware. My name is Giancarlo Berger. Like Ruben, I'm sort of Swiss, but I'm American. I was born in Boston, so no jokes about the accent. I grew up in Switzerland, about 35, 40 kilometers away from Ruben. What a coincidence. We moved in 2005 because of the weather to Orange County, and it was planned to be there for a year. That was 7 years ago. So we still have the IKEA furniture here in OC, because we still don't know when we're going back. It doesn't look like we're going back, but we still have the apartment in Germany and in Switzerland. So CQ makes magic. I used to work for Day Software in 2000 and 2005 until we moved over and was part of the specification team with Peter Piegas. So please also use the occasion to ask questions. Many I can answer. Most of them I guess I will have to look up or call Cedric. But give it a try. Client libraries. This is what I would like to cover with you. A little warm-up on some AEM. Sorry, I still can't get used to that name after 12 years of CQ. So there are some concepts behind AEM you have to understand. I don't know who was at the workflow presentation from Andreas. That's the reason why I want to put this there, because it's a different perception. Then client libraries at a glance. I tried to cover the conceptual part so that you get the idea behind it. Then of course we're going to look at it at work. I prepared a CQ instance and some dummy components and templates so we can see how they play with each other. Then, if time allows, I would like to go a bit more into configuring and debugging possibilities you have for your client libraries. Because if you have a team with 30 people going on there in the design stuff, it's going to mess up, and there's no way you're going to figure out what's going to happen if you don't have a control over it. One discussion, and I'm quite sure that was one of the topics, where to store that stuff. I think there are as many versions as there are hierarchy levels within CQ or in CRX to store it. And then of course, hopefully I answered enough that this will be short. If you have a lot of questions, then I guess I just missed it. Huh? Review of AEM concepts. I'm sure you're familiar with the difference between Adobe CQ and Adobe AEM. AEM is simply Scene 7 integration with CQ. So, and I'm sure the name will change in the next few months again. So let's stick to CQ. That's the CMS solution. One important thing here is to understand more about the ideas behind AEM. CQ has been developed with the author in mind. So a lot of all these concepts are all author or author-based. Okay, like the author only needs to know how to use the browser. Content is managed in a native way, so don't ever write in a dialog something like enter the hex value of the color you want to use. Put a slider. Okay. Content is edited on the page. That is so that the author can see what they're doing. The idea in late 90s was that the intelligent content is coming from content owners and not from the IT department. Okay. Also, after 13 years, we're dealing with issues with big firms who still don't get that idea. Then, an important aspect too, and that's where the client library thing comes in, is the separation of content from the layout. So the content per se, as you know in CQ and CRX, is stored separately from any layout information. Okay. Then something, and I like to point out they should, because even though everybody says they do it, I don't see it. I tell you, I walk into large-scale, multi-million projects where there's not one tag library. Okay. So developers should put all the functionality into, let's say, the OSGI world, and components, JSP, are purely presentation thing. The reason I point this out, a lot of the client library issues happen simply because it's extremely difficult to deal with that. Okay. Then a little bit of warm-up about development goals. Okay. So when you develop, keep the author in mind. Same will count also for the client library thing. So make it intuitive, easy components. I see funky things like you need 2 components, 3 dialogues and tabs, and they're all depending on each other. Keep that easy and stupid. Then keep in mind, content is delegated to the author. Content responsibility is owned by the author, period. Your IT don't write validation thing. If the author can't use the workflow and can't figure out that their page looks crappy, that's not an IT issue. Reusability. When you develop things, I still see, and you have some good examples how not to do it. Geometrics Outdoors, for example, shows you nicely how you shouldn't develop things. So put your code into clean and reusable APIs, beans, classes, whatever kind of thing you develop. Okay. And use Java patterns. It's CQ with the OSGI framework is huge for composite patterns and of course factory frameworks and things like that. So use that stuff, it's there. Maintenance. Many projects are written in a way that, you know, once they're done, we go home and good luck with everything. Yeah, you want to also think a little bit of the people who support it. And it's not about documentation. It's like, if you go through the Java docs on CQ, there's not a lot of information there. Okay, just make sure that people know what you're doing. Especially when you write filters and event listeners and things like that. Scalability, that's huge with CQ, but it's hardly realized in projects. Okay. Marketing campaigns, or one reason Adobe is so successful with Adobe CQ is time to market. Okay, we can create complete websites in a few weeks, few months, but do it in that way. Okay, so that they can reuse a lot of the first project in marketing campaigns. And I hope you're all doing this. Okay, now we jump into client libraries. The challenge we are seeing, and one of the reasons why this is happening, is we have, if you look at projects, you have tons of CSS files. Okay, you have JavaScript all over the place. If you just take Geometrics Demo or Geometrics Outdoors apart, you're going to be surprised where you're going to find JavaScript. if you do a list up of functions, it's scary where all the places you find that stuff. Then on top of that, the programming style is barbarous. I wanted to use horrible, but I think I'm not allowed to. It's I don't know where that comes from. I thought in the basic days, in 1875 somewhere, we learned that we should pay a bit more attention. But if you look at, just take the damn query builder and go through that query builder component. I mean, it's a... Are we taping this? I might be fired somewhere by Adobe. Yeah, hopefully they will change that in the new version. But if you take a look at that, you know what I mean. And then another funky thing is you have Jquery, XJS and all that stuff. You're going to find multiple versions of the same library split out through the whole project. Simply because you might have 25 front-end developers and everybody uses sort of the kind of tools. Okay. Then a nice thing is that nowadays the browsers start realizing that, but often heavy 2 megabyte Java function files are loaded 2 and 3 times. Luckily, browsers start realizing that, and you can, if they're not minified, take care of that. And another big reason why client libraries are so important is, I don't know if you guys on the projects also end up sort of to the end of the project where QA comes with all the bugs. Most of these bugs are all design related. 15 pixels there, the component doesn't fit within the wireframe, and so on. I did some research work, and I put actually the number a bit lower because I didn't want to scare the hell out of all front-end developers here. But 70% of all that stuff is simply, and maintaining that, fixing that, is another story. Because you have to, especially if you are not the person who wrote that stuff. I think I don't even have to ask you if you have any questions. Just imagine how nice it could be if you could break down your JavaScript and CSS files into little fragments, and they're somehow loaded magically. Load only what is needed. So, if the page is not loading, then don't load. We put all that stuff in a template, right? So if the page is based on that template, the whole JavaScript and CSS stuff gets loaded, even though you might not even need it. Then often these libraries start to get a bit tricky when it comes to loading time and when. Some have to load before the page is loaded, some have to load after the page is loaded. Analytics after, Jquery before. Then there are dependencies. You don't know if that library is loaded, so you will just load it again. That makes it then funny if you have Jquery 1.9, then you have the other library 1.9.1, and suddenly you get an error because something bites somewhere. Imagine how nice if you could even check what is loaded, on the whole page. And yes, minify, nice topic. You can't really check your CSS if it's correct once it's minified because it's just one big thing. So there are nice ways here also with the client library to check or debug your CSS and JS files. So now we get to the client library. A client library is nothing else than a folder where you place CSS files and JS files. Period. Doesn't matter if it's one big one, small ones. If you have multiple CSS files or just one, that's up to your maintenance and your support ideas behind it. Okay. The folder is of the node type CQ client library folder. That's the important part because you will also see when we're going to look into a debug tool that the way it works is just going through all the nodes of type client library folder, and then it pulls out all the information from there. Then you also have properties where you can define the behavior of your client library. I'm talking about the client library, meaning the combination of CSS and JS files. They don't have to be logically combined. You can separate them. We're going to see then in a moment how you can play around and move them. Then you can also use the HTML library manager to define if you want to minify before loading, if you want to gzip or compress your files before they go to the browser. And of course you have a tag library. Well, it's actually one tag to upload your client library, or a set of client libraries. So it's not a tag per client library. You can use the naming conventions to load multiple different client libraries in one include.
Excuse me.
Yep.
So what is that best practice to keep that JavaScript and CSS file? For my case, we keep it under everything etc/etc and the same folder. So whenever new changes coming in, so the script is part of the build. You know, anytime we change CS for JavaScript, we need to basically build the package. You know, part of the components hit deploy. So what is a good place to keep those?
We are going to cover that a bit later, because it's one of the big topics I have here on the list. Exactly, because that is also a lot between maintenance, because you can put it technically anywhere.
Right.
So some put it in /etc, some put it under each component. So you might. It's a matter how you're organized. But if it's okay, I'll cover it a few slides later. Here's an example how you can configure them. You have categories, dependencies, embed, and there's also channel and theme. I'm going to walk through the properties in a moment, but this is how you configure or you define your client library. And you can do unlimited client libraries. So you can also create smaller bits and pieces, but you have to control it. You have to know where is what, so that you can fix and update whenever it's needed. Okay. Interestingly, there's usually you can find we have Java docs, if you use it or not, but at least you can get some idea what classes are there. But there's nothing similar for JavaScript and especially CSS. Okay. So the properties mean categories define the name of the client library, and that's just the node with the properties. So that name, you can have multiple names, and it's called, for whatever reason, they call that thing categories. No one really understood why. I think it has to do more with they being in Basel and some Swiss German guys trying to translate something into English, and that's how it usually ends up. These from the old days, no actual page, act page. Okay, such a translation, and I assume categories is the same. Use namespaces, okay, so that you can better understand. You can use the same name multiple times. It's good, nice to have namespaces so you know where you're using which category. Dependencies that you can define when you want to make sure that another library has to be loaded before your library gets loaded. Embed includes other client libraries. Channels define which mobile groups you want to use this client library. Huge, this is new since 5.5. It doesn't really work yet. I hope 5.6.1 fixed some issues, because there you can define the same CSS classes, but have different flavors of it for different channels. There used to be, or I don't know if it used to be or if it's still there, something called theme, but that never worked the way we would expect it to work. Like I could say it's a green theme or the blue theme, and then it will pull out whatever it needs from each theme. It's more like a flag thing, and to be honest, I couldn't get it to work, so I just left it away, because also it's not mentioned anymore in 5.6. So let's just assume it's deprecated. a little more details about these properties. So the categories, that's giving it's to identify the client library. And you can have different names. So often you have maybe a name like, I don't know, .desktop, where you say all the desktop client libraries get loaded on once. But you can also use a different name saying it's, I don't know, component-based or page-based. Let's say it's .news, because this is specific to news, but it should get loaded with all the desktops. So you can load it as an individual client library or minify it and pack it together into a whole client library. We're going to play around with that. I built some easy examples which hopefully work so that we can see the different naming conventions. This is usually the easy part. The difficult thing is like, where do I put it, the concept behind it, these ideas. And of course you can use multiple names. You can of course create different client libraries with the same name. So when you include a client library with name, with category equals, I don't know, Jquery, it will look for all the client libraries which have that category name and load them. Okay. Nice things you can do there. Splitting up all your client libraries into smaller pieces, for example. It's also recommended to use namespaces, especially when you have multiple microsites or sub-projects running in your same environment. You might want to give it 3 or 4 different names, but it loads independently, because maybe the landing page has the whole Monty, but the news article might just need a little segment out of it. Embed, quite a cool thing. You will notice in bigger projects that you're loading 25 client libraries, and you want to minify that to maybe, or to aggregate that into one load. Then you can say, I'll create sort of a master client library and embed all the smaller ones. So you get it into one load. It takes a little longer until it's prepared, because it has to look for all the different files, but it just does one request to load. Okay, quite useful. And the code, CSS or JavaScript, is embedded before the original one of client library. So if you have a client library and you embed another one, and it loads the CSS file, it will embed the other CSS classes before the original one. It will, as a result, you will get one .css file. Sometimes. I noticed that it can happen. I have a situation where I got 3 different files and I have no idea why. But it works. Dependencies. That is actually quite a cool feature when you work with libraries. So if you have some jQuery functionality or functions you want to load, and you want to be sure that the jQuery library 1.9 is loaded, you add it as a dependency. So you can say, I have a, I don't know, cq.jquery.news article function kind of thing, and it's depending on a certain library. You add that dependency property, define which client library needs to be loaded, and on loading of the client library, it checks if that dependent library is there. If not, it gets preloaded. Actually fantastic if you have control over all your libraries, because I'm going to show then a little bit how you can organize the big stuff, the project stuff, and the component stuff. That could make it quite interesting. Then the new property channel, since I think it's 5.6, that it works. You can define if it's for touch, not touch, or default. Default is it will always load, and touch, it will only be for mobile devices. You know, the device detector with the touch selector there, and it goes to the iPhone or whatever. You can also use the channel to say the category names are the same, but some of them have the channel touch, and only those will be loaded if your include of the tag library will ask for touch only. Okay. Could be interesting when you boil it down to responsive designs with different CSS loading. I think this is replacing the theme, because the theme, even at Adobe, I think no one really knew how it works. I never get an answer. As soon as I ask about the theme property, that's when I don't get an answer. When I ask for free beer, shall we go for a drink, I get the answers. So it just shows a little bit how this works. Now, how do you define which files to load when you load your class library? Okay. It's actually rather simple. This is a node with the CQ double point client library folder node property, and underneath you do whatever you want. So for example, I created a subfolder for my CSS. I put a CSS in there. This is part of the example I'm going to show. I did 3 little components with 3 little CSS files to show you how they play together. But then you have a text file where you define which CSS to load. So whenever this client library is loaded, this is the CSS. So when you develop and someone gives you 3 files, but you only want to test 2 of them, you can drop them all in here, and here you define which ones will be loaded. Okay? It's well documented too. And you can also have subfolders. You would just add / the subfolder and then the file. This is defining which is the folder to look for these files. Okay. A bit of funky way to do it, but it works. Okay. And the same, of course, for JavaScript files. How do you load client libraries? Okay. We have the result you get from loading is something like this link tag. So that's the whole purpose of loading these client libraries. They're converted into these famous link tags. Unfortunately, you can't officially control how this link looks like, but you could, of course, dig into the foundation stuff and fumble around down there. Because there's the media type is missing. For whatever reason, it doesn't generate the media, and it could be important at some stage. We have 2 ways to use it. We have the include client lib tag, but you can also code it with the client library manager. There are a couple of functions you can use there. You see some examples where they use the client library manager, and most of them use the include client lib. I will cover the client lib as next to give you an idea how you use that. So you can define the categories, which ones to load, and you can also use multiple names. So it's not just one name. You might collect from different topics or different builds. It can be that you define stuff in sprint. You say sprint 1, they develop this part, sprint 2, the other part, and you might use something like sprint 1 dot whatever, sprint 2 dot whatever. Up to you. You can also just pull out the CSS of one or more client libraries. Okay, so in some stages you don't want the whole thing with JavaScript. You might break it down into the CSS or into the JS only. Okay. Especially when you have to load JavaScript libraries in the beginning and that analytical JavaScript functions at the end. You might, at the end, of course, not load the whole thing. You might just pull out the JavaScript. Questions so far? Okay. A lot of this stuff is well documented, full of errors, but it's documented. And it's not the technical way how to do it. You have to understand the concept. Once you get that concept, then it should be a lot easier to maintain your client libraries. And here I'm trying to jump into what I prepared. Oops, what happened? Let me see if that... Okay, what do we see this? Yes. What I did, I prepared a little project, one dummy template. It's nothing else than a script with the parses in it, just so that we can test components and play. And then I created text 1, text 2. These are text area components, just so we see something. And here I have a client library I put under the template, and oh yeah, and here I put one under the component, just to show that it really doesn't matter where you put it. Let me open the body so I can see where we are. Oops. Oh, this is a... Okay, you see, it's really nothing smart. It's... Oh, I should take this out. I just include a client library. I'll change that to the text 1 because we want to use that. And then we can take a look what happens. And here I have a parser, so it's rather simple. Here's the page. If I refresh, okay, that looks better. And you see, it takes the it creates. Okay, it uses the text 1, which I just included. That's okay. It's not. Don't start nagging around here about the code. Okay, it's really more to show you the idea. It's a CSS with just one class, so that's the one which is loaded. And if I go and, oops, sorry. Okay, I don't even have to add any. My HF2. So you see, it's using that client library, the first one. If I take another component, you see it has a complete different one. It ignores it. And now we can play around. For example, if I use desktop, oh yeah, sorry, I should maybe show you that. Oh, okay. I have, in each client library, I have OCG.text1, .text2, .text3, and for everyone also the desktop. So all three have OCG desktop. And what I want to show you is, oh, did I know? Okay. That if I go now to and load this one, and everything works well, you know what I should get? Okay. And if we look at, yeah, translate to English. Cool. I have, okay, now I start wondering why am I looking at the right one? Okay. I get one file with all three. But I'm sorry, I'm confused why I got the second CSS file. Okay. I don't know if it's a caching thing or something. Okay. But that's actually how it should happen. So you can see I get, it creates one file based on the client library name, the category name, and I have all the CSS classes in there. Okay.
So the order is arbitrary?
I hope that no one would notice that, but yes, it is arbitrary. And that's one of the issues I'm having, I'm asking if there's a way we can order that or influence it, because the law it's happening now. The answer I get is, well, use the client library manager interface. Okay, I'm not sure if that's really the good solution to do it, because what I will do, I will write a new tag which does it correctly using the client, because you want to expose that functionality from the average ASP developer. Sorry for that comment, but it's usually more secure if it's encapsulated somewhere else. And that's what they're telling me, don't touch it. So yeah, it's not ordered. But at this point, for me, it's important that you understand the idea of it. Okay, I have two names. One gives me the individual text1 class, just that specific CSS file, and using the other name, which I use in multiple client libraries, it goes and pulls all these CSS files and stores it into one CSS file. Same happens also with JavaScript. Okay. So here and that's where we start getting to where do I put that stuff. This here is out of control. You don't know where it's coming from. You just assume it's correct. And now your CSS developer will say, oh, there's an error. Well, usually you find out that there's an error. And then you have to tell him, can you fix that? He's going to have a hard time, because that's not the way it is in CQ. Actually, the front-end developer won't have a hard time. It's going to be you, because you have to put that thing together. And you, of course, don't remember anymore how it's done. And same, you see, if I use it just pulls it from the same. It doesn't load anything. It's all there. It reuses it. So it's actually, boy, am I glad that this stuff works. I tell you, it didn't work about 3 hours ago. I might have some caching in there, some caching issues. But if you understand the concept, then you can try with fixing the caching, removing it, and all that stuff. Sorry if I'm a bit excited about this stupid thing, but yeah. Those are the three styles.
Correct me if I'm wrong. That means we're keeping the CSS. So it's kind of self-contained, right? You're keeping the CSS exactly where the component. Right? It's
even worse. It's not only self-contained, but it's done in a way that you don't understand. Now this is easy because we have 3 classes in 3 different files. But when you have, 50 files with each 20 classes, you're going to get, quite a huge thing. And this is minified, so it's even worse. So there's no way you're going to figure out what's happening. That's sort of a bit the scary thing. I have to trust what I get. Now do a QA and something like that, you're glad you're not in the QA team. Because they're going, well, as long as they can do a snag it and say what's wrong, it's fine. But if they try to figure out, where to fix that. So we have to, and that's what I want to point out here too, this is too late if you try to control this here. There's no way you're going to, it won't work. You have to control it before. And that's why I put as a separate chapter, storing location and also a debugging way you can pull these things apart. Any questions so far? There's so many questions you don't know what to ask. And now I try to jump into the configuration and debugging. We have ways where you can say, don't minify or minify, don't zip it up or zip it up when you load it. And there is, in the OSGI configuration manager, there is a class or a package where you can define these configurations. Okay. And that's where you can also, next to other configuration things, define if you want it minified or not. What I'm noticing I have to verify it, but when I click the minify, I get the correct results with my CSS files on this little thing. If I don't minify, it happens that when I look at I just have one class in it, not all three. I'm not sure yet why. I have to debug that stuff, but those are the little surprises you get. So when you click on minify, at least it works. Let me show. Oops. Yeah, maybe someone told you too you should change the default password. No.
Are we on the configuration?
Oh, shoot, yeah. Correct. Thanks. Okay. Okay. So here, minify or not minify, then serve or show each CSS and JS file individually for debugging purposes. You can use the browser developer kit to see what's are loaded, gzip it or not. Max age, timing. There are a couple of useful features. For debugging purposes, there's the Firebug Lite path. I didn't try that yet. That is because that was never something which really happened. First of all, it was in the older 5.5 version extremely slow. So loading the page, let's say at my age, I'm not so patient anymore. So after something like 5 seconds, I closed the whole thing or try to reboot or whatever. So maybe it's worth trying it out now to see if that's useful, because that might give you some hints, especially when it comes to the JavaScript thing. You get in Firebug sometimes these interesting errors that on line 27,850 of the widget.js thing, there's an error. Okay. The problem is it doesn't help anything. First of all, you will never get there on the second tab, because that's all the minified client library thing. So there are other ways I'm going to show in a moment how you can sort of figure out where these things happen. And by the way, the name widget.js is a client library name and not even a file name, so it's even worse. Yeah.
For this configuration, do I need to do separately both author and publisher, or I make the changes this configuration the author, then I replicate to request a publisher?
Both, because often you have a for the author instance you have a different CSS or different JavaScript functions than you might have on the publish instance. Then in many cases you have JavaScript helpers on, let's say, for dialogues, which you of course won't use on the publish instance. So you can configure different client library classes and which ones to use in the run mode configuration part.
Okay, so you will configure differently. You
Yeah.
will manually go to publisher.
Yeah, I try to keep everything in sync so that I know that, because the moment you have a different scenario on your author instance than on the publish, you will know it, but your support team will call you, and they don't call you at lunchtime, they call you at 2 a.m. in the morning because of whatever time zone they are in. So you will try to avoid that by keeping as much in sync as possible. I usually, all that what's different, I have a specific client library for it. I even use client library names, support, something with support in there so that it's easier for them to fix it. But nowadays they don't let me touch JavaScript stuff anymore for the sake of security and budget, I guess.
So if you tick timing so that you can use that feature, does that add any extra overhead to the load? If you're not using it, if you don't use it, if you don't hit the Control U?
I didn't notice any big differences, but I would have to try on something like NASCAR where they have heavy loads, a lot of JavaScript stuff. That would be interesting to find out, yeah. But I didn't notice any. Let me just get back just to. We're talking about the timing. Okay. This is, I would say, it's, from my point of view, it's minor. It's an interesting helper. If I want to figure out the timing, I usually have, there's something called proxy.jar, and I rewrote that a little bit so that I can get JavaScript loading times in there, in the same log thing, because then I can compare that against the page load. So if I have a landing page, 7 seconds, and then I can see which parts take long, and then I also see the load time of the JavaScript. That's the proxy.jar tool. And that's 150 years old. I think it was from version 2 already available. No, 3 is the first Java version. But yes, this can help understand the loading time things, because depending on the load time, you might change the way your client libraries are loading. And one thing I, of course, forgot to mention. Oh no, I don't have it. Okay, I removed it. But you can, of course, also do a CQ include tag library within the component. Okay, so from the component design perspective, the more layout and design stuff you put into a component, the less reusable it gets. Okay, so if you can not only make a clear separation of layout, design, and content and the presentation layer, separate that stuff and use client libraries for that, you can go and add specific component libraries and replace them if you want to reuse your component for something else. A typical case is the search box. I see in projects where I usually end up, sort of towards the end when nothing works anymore, and then you see 12 to 50 different versions of a search box. Functionality is always the same. Unfortunately, a lot is in the JSP file, but it's always the same thing. So if you can extract that functionality, put it somewhere else, and reuse that, and just replace client libraries for that component, you can create, you can reuse your same search component with 50 different flavors. Okay, and in fact, you can of course also automate the way it loads it. You can make, if you can make a meaningful naming convention thing, it can, depending on whatever site you are, load this class library and not the other one. So it's worth thinking into these.
So you're saying the author would select what kind of search to load and load a different client library based on?
Yes and no. You can either say, depending on what the author, but not tell him to search the client library. Right. Just give him a name. Are you on? Is it a news article page? Is it an asset page? Something like that. He says yes, it's an asset page or image page, and then depending on that, of course, you would load different client libraries. In the other world, you could of course use page properties to define what type of page you are, and then depending on that, you can sort of automate the way it loads. Often you have microsites which use the same components but have a different design. So all you really need to do is load a different CSS, and then you start. If you understand the concept well, you can of course easily go and manipulate that. And then you can add, you can say, H1 and H2 tags are always the same, but maybe others are, and you can break it down into fragments and use the same name for these parts and do two loads. One is for the, or you create dependencies, where you say load the main CSS first and then come the funky details for whatever I'm doing. Okay. And you see that even Adobe is learning that stuff. Because if you look at geometrics, you won't find client libraries somewhere around the component world. If you look into geometrics outdoor, you're going to notice that there are a lot of client libraries under the templates and under the components, simply because they're trying to separate that. And I hope that in AM6 that will be cleaned up. We are actually, Ruben and I are invited in such a project to clean up this stuff. Okay. I'm just afraid we won't be paid in money but in beer. Oh shoot, is this recorded? Sorry, David. Okay, any questions about so far? Also the OSGI, and absolutely free, of course, to write your own configuration bundle or your own OSGI bundle, which could maybe do some kind of this outfiltering and loading of themes. And technically, you could use the client library class or actually interface to do the same thing as a event listener kind of thing, that on certain pages you just replace that. Mobile, often we use the multi-site manager, and then we convert components into the, I don't know, M underscore, same name as the component thing. You could, of course, use something like that, where it's a pure design-related thing. Oh shoot, I'm running over time here. I'm a little like Cedric, you have to stop. Debugging tools. Okay. One thing you might have noticed by now is if you don't have the first part, the organizational part of the client libraries under control, you're going to run into some disastrous mess, because you're not going to figure out, if you look at the source or even use your developer tool to look at the CSS files, the names of these CSS files don't make sense, because they're partially out of the client library name, they're partially the category name, and I will show you also you can summarize the CSS files of your design page to one CSS file, and that unfortunately has the name of the page. And in the JavaScript with 50,000 lines of code, you're lost if line 7,800 is an error. Okay, so here are some helpers. You can use to see the embedded files. That's usually something where you want to, you have a client library and you embed something else because you just want one request load. Yeah, then it gets a bit tricky to figure out in which file do I have to fix my whatever bug. So you can add debug client libs true at the end, and it lists the embedded files. Then this is quite a nice feature. You can list all the client libraries in use. Okay. If you do that on geometrics, then it's surprisingly a lot. And then you can review individual categories. So I can pull out like osg.desktop, and then I see what's used. Okay. And one thing which is also very helpful, you can rebuild client libraries too. So when you did some work or you run into something like I am running into, where maybe some caching might prevent reloading of something, you can go and rebuild.
Where do you do that? Where do you do rebuild?
I'm showing you in this moment. Oh, I should have preloaded the page because I of course forgot. Sorry, just have to take. Okay.
No, capital O.
course, I'm sure I'm not even. What do I have? Debug client libs equals true. Debug. And it doesn't look like it's. Okay, I'll check it afterwards quickly.
It's in the source, you have to use source.
Oh! Okay, it's the other one, it's the dumper. Yeah, you're right. Okay. Thanks. So here, now you get, of course, also all the granite and all the CQ stuff. Unfortunately, I forgot to not load everything, so I have all the. Oh no, that actually comes from when you have the edit bar, that stuff. So let me go down to our thing, and I have no dependencies, no embed in there, so it doesn't list any. But it would list the embeds for this CSS file. This way you can sort of see which files do I have, and then you can go and check them and fix them. Okay. And the other one we have is the dump libs. Oh, let me see if libs granite. Oops. Does someone know it by heart? Libs granite. UI content. UI content dump libs. That looks better. And this gives you the libraries by path. And somewhere, of course, at the bottom, these are etsy. There are ours. Oops. Libraries by channel. Shoot, that was too fast. Okay. Somewhere in here are.
Do you know if this is also in 5.5 or is this just 5.6?
This is 5.5 as well. Who is still on 5.4?
Client lips for 5.5, right? No, 5.5 worse than 5.
Okay. Yeah, there's try to upgrade to 5.6 if you're on 5.5, simply because the service pack 2 is also a bit buggy and all that stuff has been fixed. They didn't come out with a service pack 3. Yeah.
5.6.1 is almost out, I guess.
Oh yeah, I got the announcement already. Yeah. Okay, so in here and here you can rebuild your libraries. That will take a while, so I won't do that because it's a ton of it. Here for output testing, this is, you can desktop, I think we used, huh? And then, okay, I'm not using it.
It's OCG.
Oh. What time is it? Ah, okay, so here it shows you also how what it does with how the categories are interpreted. And for whatever reason, the theme shows up again. So I'm trying to get an answer on that. No, I don't get it back. Even Marcel Boucher, you maybe know from the I think now he's product management, but he used to be an RD. Not even he's answering on these things. And he wrote about client libraries. So, yeah, I might have to drink myself through an Adobe evening to get that answer. Okay. So you have the two debugging ways. It's the dump libs and the question mark debug client libs equals true, and then you see that in the source. Your theme? Storing client libraries. Think and plan that stuff, because you won't have one. The more you have, the more you have to organize it. And there are no really helpers around you to help to organize that. So you have to do what an author has to do. If there are 10,000 pages, you need to start searching for that stuff. So the naming convention is, of course, one part you want to think of. But then make sure your client libraries are of node type CQ client library folder. That's one of the biggest mistakes. You create that folder, because we're always talking about a client library folder, and then you are surprised why it doesn't work. Okay. And the thing is that you can't easily change the node type. You might have to just redo it again and then start copying things around. And this I should write in red and blinking. Document that stuff. It's amazing. You have the mock-ups, you have the wireframes, and that's about it what you get in documentation. And then you have 3 million lines of JavaScript code, and there's not one comment on anything. Okay. So try to document, even if it's just an Excel file, where you collect whatever you're doing. Okay. Then also be consistent in how you store your client libraries. Okay. You can have them all in one place, like somewhere on Etsy, or you can have them individually under each component. Make sure that you're consistent, so that if someone who has to fix or support, they don't spend 3 days just finding whatever they're looking for. They have sort of, okay, that's a component, that's a search component, I'll look there first, or let me look first in the main bucket and then whatever. So make it consistent so that it's easy for the support team. That's a killer if it's not clean. First of all, you're going to forget it after 3 months. I'll forget it after 3 weeks. You might 3 months, okay, but you'll forget it. So maintenance and support team, keep them in mind. Most errors happen on the front end level, and the more libraries we're using, I mean JavaScript libraries and things happening, the more, with the fusions and the funky responsive web design kind of thing and all that stuff, the more problems you're going to have if it's not clean. Okay. What locations do we have? Okay. We have, typically, there's something called /etc/clientlibs. You won't find that folder if you use the console. Okay. You see it. Okay. With CRXDE, you see this folder. But if you look at tools, you don't see it. Okay, it's hidden from the average author. There's a certain reason for that. So the purpose of that folder is rather simple. Whatever, let's say we call it JavaScript libraries you use, put them there. Whatever stuff which is sort of hidden away from the rest of the world, but it needs to be there, like XJS libraries, JavaScript libraries, I guess Amber kind of thing, or whatever is coming. Put it on the /etc/clientlibs. You see there also Adobe put something like foundation stuff. So that's they use that as a startup loader. Let's say if you have logins and all that stuff which you use on pages which have everything, you can just hack it out there. Usually stuff you most likely won't touch. So whatever you think that's going to be rather static throughout the whole project, dump it into /etc/clients. Then we have always the discussion, like you mentioned, where to put these client libraries. Okay, I recommend that what is project-wide used, like there's a main CSS, there's some special things used throughout the whole project. I would put them maybe somewhere on the /etc/designs, which things which are component specific, where you want to separate the functionality from the design, put them under the components. Okay. The trick here is to be consistent, so that someone who supports says, okay, that's sort of a site-wide kind of issue. They can go and look for it here, and else here. Keep in mind, though, the more you load up your design page, the longer, of course, loading time takes, especially if you have a lot of stuff which you don't need. So here I reduce it often to just that part which is specific to the site, which always needs to be loaded. Okay. And you see that also when you look at the geometrics examples, you're going to see they don't follow it consistently, but at least they're thinking about it. And I think now they realize with geometrics outdoors, sort of, we have to do something there. Okay. Of course, ideally, in the ideal world, you have no more JavaScript in your JSPs. Okay. That would be sort of the easiest, because then you can focus on client libraries. You load them, and that's where the functionality happens. If you write code for specific things, you might not put that JavaScript. Okay, there are exemptions, but try to avoid putting that stuff into the JSP. Because maintenance, if they have to first check the JSP, no, it's not there, and first go there and so on. I mean, Firebug can help you figure out where it is, but keep in mind, there's someone who has to support that thing, and you want to be friends with them. Okay. At least as long as they have your phone number. Yeah, you see here, am I on? Okay, you see a lot of, here's foundation. On the foundation, they have, of course, all sorts of, scene 7 video kind of thing. They don't want us to touch it, so it's all put under there. Site catalyst kind of thing, whatever. That's dropped out. Then under designs, oops. Okay, you have. Let me see. Yeah, you have all sorts of client libs. And you see here, this is a lot smarter than the original geometrics had. They started putting together a client library for mobile, client library for desktop, but the category names, you can still load them individually or all together. Then there's a nifty little method which is available under the design interface for design page. So as you have the current design is given to you by the CQ desktop define objects tag. So you have current design. There's a method called write Css Includes. So it takes all the CSS of that design page and creates one CSS. Okay. So if you if you have a smaller microsite thing, you might create just one design page, drop all the CSS in there, and then use this here to create one CSS to load it. Okay, so that's another option you can use. Just make sure you document and your teams know that it is done this way. Yeah.
In the example where you use the hashtag base and equals CSS to the folder in the css.txt, will doing that just alone load all of the CSS files within that CSS folder, or do you have to additionally list them, and that's just the base?
You have to list them.
Okay.
And the reason is that because sometimes for testing purpose you want all of them, you don't want all of them. There was a discussion about something like all CSS or CSS all, something like that, if you have a few of them. But I think it never made it into the product. So that's, by the way, one way to figure out which CSS files are loaded is to search for all the css.txt files and then take a look at them. You can maybe write a small function. If it starts getting a bit nerdy with the whole support of these client libraries, that could be, of course, one way to find out which extent dump libs thing.
Thank you.
Did I forget anything in your client library experience?
I guess there's one thing, right? So since 5.5, the client library also supports less.
Yeah.
So you can actually have .less files and it compiles them. So for the ones that do that kind of work.
Yeah.
Cool. But my big question is really, so what's your guys' preference to store client libraries into this thing? Like with components, one CSS, because that's something I'm always struggling with to see what's actually a good solution or preferred solution.
The problem here is it's a maintenance question. How does your maintenance team work, or how does the people who maintain the site work? It's for them. Because for me it doesn't care. I know what I'm doing, but I'm gone after a while. And then you have the support team who has to take care of it. So it's extremely important discussion to have to how to organize it.
Our components start out with the client lib in the component, and inevitably, because we have incorporated responsive design now with our new redesign, everything is moving up into the head. Yeah, with a single out of a client library responsive file loaded last in the head. We're still playing around with it.
Yeah.
There seems to be a better approach, right? Because the CSS people have one place to go.
Yeah.
It's more like regular traditional HTML CSS development.
Let's say what you might want to avoid is pure front-end developers who are cool with their Creative Cloud tools like Dreamweaver and JavaScript, whatever. You don't necessarily, at the moment, with 5.6, you don't really want them to play around with the CQ development environment, because that could get a bit messy. On the other hand, they are now trying to include sort of JavaScript development tools into the CQ. They're replacing the CRXDE with hopefully something a bit more powerful, where you also have this JavaScript development and you can integrate that into whatever. Adobe realized the issue we're having, because the front-end developers have no clue about CQ, but you also don't want them to stop doing their work because they have to spend 3 weeks to figure out where to put this stuff. So usually what happens, they provide us with the JavaScripts, and they tell that is for this part or this section, and it's us to organize that and document it. What I start is to, like, I don't have include header and include body.jsp usually. I have to more like components, so that I can put client library things in there. I can put dialogues to that part and just use them as a component, even though it's just the header section. And then I can grow it, including client libraries, without with clean separation of design from the functionality. So in the current CQ world, there's sort of an include of headlibs.jsp. So the whole idea behind that is to put these include tags for the tag libraries in there. But I usually do that in the header and footer because that's where you load these things, and then create them as components, and then add let's say the more basic ones you use over the whole website. I place them in the header component or head component and footer component because that's usually where you're going to look for the main CSS and JavaScript files. Then of course what you don't have to do, you don't have to put the JavaScript and CSS into the same library. You can have one for the CSS part and one for the, the cool thing, you're absolutely free what you do, but that means you have to organize yourself.
Yeah, that's what we're doing. Our libs and for JavaScript go up in the head, and then all of your UI behavior, JavaScript goes at the bottom of the page in a separate library.
And then you can separate that. And then you can also have, like, you have a main, like you might have an OSGI tag library, you might have a JavaScript function library, and then you use that as a dependency. Okay? And then you just have your pure component-specific JavaScript functions. The drawback there, of course, if you use the same component twice, you're going to, of course, have to make sure that you might have some ID kind of thing so that the JavaScript doesn't infect the other component, but sometimes you also want, of course, on the front-end side, that one JavaScript controls the same, 6 teaser components with some kind of whatever thing. So it's really up to how you want to do it. Did that actually answer the location question? You see, you're not alone.
We can eat good and bad because we keep everything in the TFS, all the huge, thousands and thousands CSS, JS file. Like every time the change is coming in, so we need to do manual release management. Build it, deploy. That's a challenge.
Yeah, it's actually
a lot of my management. Hey, just for CSS, what do you need for the release process?
Yeah, it's actually a good point because if you look at the CSS file like content, then you can go through a package deployment replication process. You don't need the whole code deployment, QA, 6-week kind of cycle until it's there. Then yes, try to use it as packages. Create a package and push the package around, because then you can deploy a lot faster. Keep in mind, one of the goals of CQ is to have a very short, shortest possible time to market. So if they want to do a campaign, marketing business want to do a campaign, the more it's author driven, the faster it gets deployed. As soon as you have code in it, you have of course your IT deployment cycles, which can be quite challenging. And try to avoid that stuff. Yeah.
One thing we did notice that when you replicate the CSS JS file, so we did notice that the inconsistent behavior on the dispatcher cache. Sometimes we not really clear the cache when you replicate. So there are time to time we need to manually go and clear the dispatcher.
Are you sure it's dispatch, not browser?
Dispatcher,
Because usually, my experience is that CSS and JavaScript errors occur more due to the browser cache rather than the CQ dispatcher.
Are you saying that they're errors, or that the new deployment goes up and you don't see the changes?
Yeah, so we need to manually go and clear the dispatcher cache.
We go a step further, and we have to delete our client libs from the var. Yeah, and then it recycles it.
So I think in some scenarios CQ5 has the issues to detect if changes are in source folders of client libs, so it wouldn't basically rebuild the client libs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Something,
There's something with I mentioned the rebuild client libraries. Look at that code, pull out the cleaning of the /var and create your own, let's say, clean var kind of thing, and then automate that.
I think I tried that, but in the new somebody made changes in a CSS file. When I replicate, then I go manually with the publisher, make sure the changes are there. Then I see the new changes. But when I come back to dispatcher, see the file, there is a difference. So that means some reason when I replicate, it's supposed to flush that cache. Then
try. I noticed that when I was creating these examples too. When I had in the configuration manager the HTML library manager, and I click the minify, for whatever reason I don't get these issues. I have not figured out why yet. Maybe I will never figure it out. But just check if that helps, because at least you get an indication. Okay, let me see what the class is doing, and then that could be a hint for. This is actually the first time I had issues with client libraries, in the sense like when I quickly changed something, save, reload, I got unexpected results, and then I clicked the HTML library manager thing, the minify, and it worked. So that's why I had some kind of excitement when the 3 different colors showed up, because it worked. I would say at least 80% sure it's browser cache thing, because often when I just clean out the whole cache, browser cache, things work again. But on the other hand, it's also a loading thing. So if you do view source and you just see 1 instead of 3 CSS files, that is happening on the server side, and that's when that would actually happen, the issue. It would be interesting to.
We had issues with basically libraries that people, for example, if we use a Jquery version, we got issues with keeping that as a non-minified source file in the repository as a client library, and then using the library manager to minify that. Just because that minify library that CQ is using actually is through an exception minifying that file, because they used some, I don't know, advanced language syntax or something for JavaScript.
They used Yahoo.
The YUI compressor.
Yeah, YUI. Yeah,
so because of that, basically at some point, for some libraries we had to switch to just uploading the minified version as a JavaScript file basically in the repository and include that as a standalone.
Interesting.
Yeah, I've also seen it choke sometimes on at font face for the CSS when you minify it.
Yeah. So I think for libraries, personally, I don't think that's a big drawback, because you don't really need the dependency management for something like Jquery that you need to load anyway.
No, it's actually the other way around. What you write depends on Jquery, so and usually it's already there at some stage. You can of course overcome that by simply have load it first and then assume it's there.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. And I think one limitation of the library manager is that the minify flag is global. So basically you cannot say, I don't want to minify these few files, because that would be a good solution for those scenarios. That's going to be the day where you're going to write your own little extended configuration manager.
Has anybody upgraded the CQ5 jQuery to like the latest one? And is that possible?
jQuery?
Yeah, because it's using what?
1.9? 1.
No, 1.7 or
1.7?
Yeah, it's old.
Well, isn't CQ namespacing to CQ anymore?
It does, but it still starts with the library, the core library, right?
Yeah.
And then it just namespaces it.
Yeah.
I'll get back to you, I think.
I saw that question come up like last week from somebody else as well. So
Just for the speed impact, that it's making.
it should be possible.
It should affect if it's backwards compatible. It should be no
That's what
problem.
I'm trying to think. I mean, there are some breaking changes in 1.9 with respect to $.browser.
So let me ask you want to upgrade jQuery for CQ itself or
Yeah.
jQuery for your site?
CQ for itself.
Would have Adobe.
Yeah, I would. That's the answer I would follow. Simply because you don't want to run into any risks like, oh, we don't support it on.
Right, but then I don't want to. If we run into this issue, because correct me if I'm wrong, they have jQuery UI in there too, right?
Yeah.
And we can, and because of the performance hit with using the newer versions of UI, if you had to use UI.
Dumb question. What's the latest version of jQuery? 181.
1.9,
Yeah, well,
and they're even at 2 now.
Okay,
For-
so because the new UI, the Touch UI,
the Coral UI.
the Coral UI uses 181. So for the new UI, they're using different content. I think time for
Yeah, it's just a silly question because
No, it's an interesting one because what happens, with the future releases, you kind of as long as it's backwards compatible, I guess it shouldn't be a big problem because I don't see CQ using specific things. They're right there. Interesting, it's going to be when they replace the XJS with the Coral UI and to see what's going to happen there because the XJS was a bit funky when you tried to replace the library. Suddenly you got some weird kind of errors because it did just.
Yeah, I bet you they stayed on 1.8 because of the browser deprecation, the browser functionality.
It could, yeah, and they're not, let's say,
versus feature detection.
yeah, because with that large organization, it just takes longer until they get there. And the more these standard libraries are coming in, the more testing they have to do, and that will just be
Yeah, and the whole point of the question was that I'd love to leverage the same jQuery that CQ is using. I don't have to load it twice because we are loading it twice because of the performance boost that we get with 1.8.
Authoring experience or
Yeah.
or publish, right? So in
Publish.
publish, right? In publish, you don't load anything from.
You're still using the analytics, right?
Yeah, the analytics, and if you have the asset share, asset editor kind of thing, that is of course also
I mean,
published.
it's possible, right? They would avoid to load anything from CQ and in the publish instance.
So if you want to use the out-of-box analytics.
Yeah, that one, but then you need to.
And there's the other thing that if you want to do the reporting coming from CyCatalyst, you must make. I think there could also be an issue with the upgrade of jQuery.
Yeah.
And it would be interesting to see if they can at least decouple that, CyCatalyst whole thing, so that it's separate. So that because if that doesn't use any special kind of features, so it should be actually upgradable to any kind of jQuery version. While if they have, like in the asset share, asset editor, where they have some specific functionality that could bite if you upgrade. So
Yeah.
if it's just the analytics, then maybe it should be possible. Because as far as I remember, there's nothing. It's more the Ajax functionality they're using to trigger the analytical requests. And there's this. Not search and promote, but the one which goes beyond just the CQ site, but whatever you do in your browser gets collected. I think that's also jQuery 1.8 based, and that's because of the browser detection thing, you don't want to upgrade that.
Right.
I think that those files, right, only the first time, right? I think we have heavy traffic, like 12 million users.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see much performance issue. So only the first time that somebody access, those files get cached.
Mm-hmm.
I think dispatcher, right? So usually it gets from dispatcher.
Correct.
After the first.
Well, and in some cases you might even use a CDN with 12 million users. You might even have something up front of the CQ dispatcher.
I mean, the one thing that bugs me a little bit about the client library is that, for example, just for jQuery, right, I can't point it to the edge cached Google one as a dependency, right? Because that would increase the download performance massively.
And it's the performance on the actual.
You could technically do it by having a JavaScript function which does that. And that function is then in the dependency. But that is not so good, because if you reload it 3 times, it's going to download it 3 times because there's no controlling. So you can't just say, you know, have your function do the Google download. You also have to detect if it's already there before you do the download thing. Now you have that on the server side, but your code is running on the client side, so you might have to find...
Yeah, it would be nice to basically say, like, this is a JS.txt that references an outside site, right?
Yeah.
Because Google has jQuery cache, so a lot of sites are using that, so your browser only has it downloaded at any given time, right? And the jQuery download is 0.
You could actually... No, because that's happening server side.
Yeah.
Yeah. You might, of course, you could, yeah, you would have to download it manually and have your client side check if it's already there or not.
Well, you can do just your own input, right?
Yeah, exactly. You can. I mean, it's not forbidden to write your own link tag.
Yeah, you're wanting to put it in the css.txt, but if you're putting an absolute path in there, why couldn't you?
You can.
Can?
I don't think that's
Oh, that's something to try out. Yeah, up to now I just put the file name and no, but no, forget
Not
it.
the link include, but just the direct.
The
path.
HTTP, no,
Yeah.
because it collects these things and puts it together. I mean, it's something to try, but I
Well, it
don't.
would collect it and build it, right?
Well, I don't want it to download this to my server, right?
Well, then you got to put it in here.
Nah, you would have to do some kind of detection first on the client side, and if it's not there, then you do the download.
If we try to use that or company policy, they said you can't do that. You know, nothing outside or you know.
That's of course the coolest answer, because then you say, dudes, forget it.
I always say, like, why do you want Google to track your site?
Yeah, exactly.
They already are.
Yeah.
Well,
Don't worry about it.
and after the stuff you read about the NSA, you might not want to really go that route
So
anymore.
you still have camera, right?
Yeah. If I'm not showing up anymore.
No, he's a nice one. Don't worry about it.
Okay. Any other questions?
How hard would it be to edit the proxy.jar to add that JS download time to that? Is that something that you could do, or could we leverage what you've done?
Well, yeah, that goes into turn off the camera because you have the resource sensing from Adobe.
Carib headwire.
Oh, we can.
Just kind of maybe that question. You know, one of all the. Some of you can tell me, you know, what kind of tools you guys use for editing JS, JavaScript, CSS files? Eclipse.
Sublime text too.
Or IntelliJ.
It's a good one.
Yeah. And then, of course, usually, let's say at my age, what I do, I smile at one of our front-end developers and ask him to do it. Because it takes him 25 seconds, and okay, off the record, it takes me longer. I don't know if anyone from Sapien will see that, just for the sake of... It takes long. I mean, yeah, I'm not a front-end developer, so it is already... It's nice to have teams where you can work together and ask them to take care of that. And on the other side, I do more the back-end and Java and all that work.
Yeah, and in our environment, our front-end guys, they do the JSPs and client libs. They're all up in the CQ5.
Oh, yeah.
But they understand it.
So I actually prefer that. I prefer the CSS developer working directly, actually even stopping out the components.
Maybe something that can be helpful. What we often do, we spider a page. So we get the HTML representation of it. And I have there the comments, you know, when which part starts, which component starts, something like that. And then have any Dreamweaver folks work on that thing. I get it back, and then it's easy to put it back into place. Okay, because they can work, they can visualize it. It's not like they have to read code. They can use a visualization tool to work on it. And then you get, of course, the code back, and you can just you can do a diff on your code base and figure out what the differences are if it's not commented.
So Sapien, your front end guys use like the WYSIWYG editor in Dreamweaver?
It's almost a natural thing if you have the Creative Cloud subscription. And then, yeah, I don't know whatever tools they have. Whenever I talk to them, I don't even understand them anymore nowadays. So 2 weeks later, all the tools changed. It's of course, when you're young, you're a bit freaky. You want the latest thing, which comes out. If it's useless or not, doesn't matter. I mean, we were
killing
young.
the front end people.
No, it's. I mean, the creative work is fantastic. What you get nowadays. I mean, it might not be marketing conform. It might be a bit tricky to implement in a CMS solution, but nowadays you really get fantastic things. I mean, I just saw guys did. Okay, it was Sapient, but they did the Fiat, the new Fiat. Are you lonely tonight? Advertisement thing, and now they came out with the website thing. I mean, it's just fantastic. And even financial industries, it's not like you have this average kind of site. You start thinking in user experiences. Okay, not like Fiat, of course, but sort of, it's just getting a bit more adaptable to use, because sooner or later that's going to be the way you're going to work. So you might as well do it. And so we try to avoid stopping creative people to be creative, and just try to fix it in, because the result is worth it. Yeah. Famous last words.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.